Thank you for coming out on this very hot night. Thank you. So good evening and welcome to Seven Stories Up. Karen Berger, Amy Chu, and Soo Lee, Carmilla. We're delighted to have you all join us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. My name is Allison Nellis and I'm a supervising librarian of programming outreach here at SNFL. And I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like tonight's conversation possible. And I would also like to encourage you to visit MIPL's website to take a look at upcoming programs just like this one. We have a really exciting lineup of new nonfiction, music, and more. We'd love for you to join us in the space again. And it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Karen Berger is the editor of Berger Books, a line of acclaimed creator-owned graphic novels from Dark Horse Comics. An award-winning editor, she founded Vertigo, the legendary imprint of DC Comics, where she published over 350 properties, including the groundbreaking and best-selling series Sandman, V for Vendetta, Preacher, and Why the Less Man, and she was inducted into the Will Eisner Comics Hall of Fame in 2018. Amy Chu is a multi-genre writer for comics and animation. Her most recent graphic novel, Carmilla, is Carmilla. For TV, she contributed to 2 seasons of the Netflix anime series DOTA, Dragon's Blood. At DC and Marvel, she has worked on popular characters such as Wonder Woman, Poison Ivy, Deadpool, Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, and Iron Man. Known for her contemporary run of the long-running sword fantasy Red Sonja, she is also the first woman to write The Kiss and the Green Hornet series. Her graphic novels for children include Fighting to Belong, Turning Red, Sea Sirens and Sky Island, and Anna and the Cosmic Race. Amy has created educational comics for many charities, including the New York Historical Society, Baltimore Museum of Art, the Museum of Chinese in America, and the Asian American Foundation. In addition to judging for the Ringo and Harvey Awards, she serves on the faculty of the Kubert School and the School of Visual Arts, and is a board member of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a double bachelor's degree in architectural design from MIT and East Asian Studies from Wesley College. And you can follow her on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Soo Lee is a freelance comic artist and illustrator living in New York City. She is the illustrator and co-creator of the title Carmilla, the First Vampire, and Carmilla, the Last Vampire Hunter. Growing up in Queens, New York, Sue had the luck of being exposed to different arts and cultures, which led her to the School of Visual Arts and majoring in cartooning and pursuing her career in comics. Sue has been published by various companies such as Dark Horse, DC Comics, Dynamite, Skybound, and Ahoy. Her work also includes illustrations for magazines, Sierra and Analog Science Fiction and Fact. And Sue's favorite genres are horror, it's not very elegant to do this, horror and fantasy. She is a self-proclaimed connoisseur of Asian gangster films. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's participants.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out on the hottest day of the year. We're thrilled that you're all here. And we have a really great discussion planned and just kind of walk you through a little bit of what we're planning to do. We're going to show some slides from each of the 2 Carmilla books, and the 3 of us are gonna sort of talk through what's going on and riff on certain themes and characters, and whatever other interesting digressions come up. And then we will open the floor up for questions. And then there will be a signing and books to purchase right around the corner over there too. Yeah, a lot of stuff planned for this 45 minutes. Before we start, I just wanted to ask, how many people have read the Carmilla graphic novels? Okay, great. Then how many people haven't and just decide to check them out? Awesome. Okay, well, I hope after this that you'll be inclined to want to take a read.
I did bring a little bit of swag afterwards.
That's true. Yeah. Anyway, before we start, I wanted to ask Amy, the writer and co-creator of the series, if she could tell us about the origins of the Carmilla graphic novel and what inspired her to reimagine a gothic story from 19th century into a modern day tale?
Okay, so truthfully, the origins was, we were just discussing this a little bit. Karen invited me out to lunch at San Diego Comic-Con, and I'm like, oh my gosh, lunch with the legendary Karen Berger. This is awesome, right? But I wasn't necessarily prepared as maybe one should. It was a wonderful lunch, but she did ask if I had anything, I believe this was what happened, if I had anything that I was working on that was of interest, and my mind sort of raced at that point, and I had literally just read an article about Carmilla, the original Carmilla, right? And I sort of threw that out as, did you know that Carmilla preceded Dracula by something like 26 years, that if you thought about it, Dracula was kind of a gender-switched Carmilla? And she said, no, that's interesting. And then I think she said something else following that, vampires always sell. And I was like, okay. So that was the quickest pitch, honestly.
I've published many vampire comics over the years.
So that was a bit of the origin, but truthfully, part of it was kind of taking that, if you are all thinking about pitching, right, of taking there needs to be a little intellectual curiosity on your part, and this was obviously very interesting. Of course, I read the original Carmilla, which is available on, and it's public domain, Gutenberg. Go ahead and read it, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting and somewhat mischaracterized by a lot of mainstream media. If you read it, it's a good read, in fact. The ending is a bit abrupt, but, that's 19th century for you. Got to kill the bad person, right?
Right. And it was serialized initially as well.
Yeah. So all these things are very interesting, but not some. And I've done this before, where I've adapted original stuff. I've done some original L. Frank Baum stuff. So I don't want to say I'm used to adapting, but I could see where the possibilities were, and that is really kind of how that happened.
And Sue, you came onto the project through Amy. I think you had known Amy through the Kubert School, right? I think you were teaching there as well, too?
I was teaching there for like a year for... Yeah, we met before that, but I actually did online classes during the pandemic. So that's...
Right.
I couldn't really see anybody.
Right, yeah. And what was so great about having Sue aboard is that her style was, or is, perfect for, for vampires, for
I like
a
that.
modern day
Perfect for
setting.
vampires.
Perfect for vampires, exactly. So it was, great to also have another woman on the project. So, and it has...
And Sue is also a native New Yorker. It's set in New
Yes,
York, and I think that's really important. That I've worked with people before who are not, and they get certain details that if you live in the city, you get called out. Like, TV shows that are set in Vancouver, very obvious, not New York. Didn't want any of that.
That's right. You use your reference well. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there were some neighborhoods that I knew very well, like the
Right,
back
yeah.
of my hand. I mean, I remember when we used to have subway tokens.
Yes, right, yeah. The story actually in Carmilla, in the first book, takes place in 1990s New York, when, homelessness, crime was at its peak. Subways, well, I guess the subways are still pretty disgusting at times, but I think they were worse then.
The garbage smell in August, right? People remember that.
Right, yeah, but that's forever, unfortunately. And it was also at the peak of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So it was it was a memorable time, shall we say? Anyway, let's start with some nice pictures to look at. So here we go. Something happening? So that was, hey, great. So that was obviously the book trailer for the first volume that came out in January 2023. And we timed it so it'd come out for the Lunar New Year. And we did make it, I think, the tail end of the Lunar New Year that year, because the story does take place during the year of the rat, right? I think it was Year of the Rat.
It was,
yeah,
yes.
Right? Yeah, it was Year of the Rat. Yeah, yeah. So that was actually a great sort of, marketing tool, of course. We all have to have great marketing tools. But it worked out great for our schedules, too. So that was good. So I guess let's just start talking about the two main characters of the book. And the book pretty much doesn't open at the New York Public Library across the street, but there is an important scene at the New York Public Library, and I figured what a better way to start this presentation than to show the New York Public Library here. And our main character is Athena Lowe, who's a social worker who becomes obsessed with murders of homeless women, mostly queer women, who are being killed on the subways and the streets of New York. Police don't really seem to care. No one is really investigating what's happening to these women. And when it turns out that one of the victims is a client of Athena's, she decides to take matters into her own hands. So, Amy, do you want to pick up and take us to the New York Public Library?
Yeah, so as Karen was saying, she does become obsessed, partly because this is slightly based on real life. In the 90s, I did work in Chinatown. I was the executive director of a nonprofit during that time, Asian American nonprofit, and social services. And there's some ring of truth in that these kind of deaths tend to get unreported and not, it's not a priority for folks. So there is some element of truth in this, not necessarily that they were caused by vampires, but it makes, an interesting backdrop, but also to highlight some disparity and injustice of what's going on during that time and even today. But the hook that part of it was Karen basically saying we should put in excerpts of the actual Carmilla, which was terrific. And so part of this is her not only...
I thought that was your idea.
I think it was a joint idea. Maybe I brought it. She validated it,
right.
But that it was the discovery of the book itself and also what's going on. And what better way to find the book is, the actual book in the rare book section of the New York Public Library. So that is that scene you can see here, which is interesting, right? Because she checks it out, and I hate to, I don't, never read comments, right, in the social media. I think for some people, they thought that was absurd. Like, why would she even just check? Couldn't she just look it up online? This is 1996, so...
Right.
So I had,
computers,
I had Sue
flip
drawing
phones.
a microfiche machine. Some of you remember the microfiche.
I used to use them in the
did you?
library.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah,
if that's
yeah.
still a thing, but Anyway, for some folks, I guess they don't know what that is. So there's a little bit of nostalgia in this. It was, hopefully it was fun, because New York Public Library is one of my favorite, the main building's one of my favorite buildings. So I did study architecture, so I generally try to get cool buildings in. But that was the inspiration behind that, right?
And Sue, do you want to tell us who this is?
Well, should I say it's Violet or technically it's Carmilla?
I think most
Both.
people figured it out by now, right?
Right.
Yes. She's in her disguise, I guess, right? This is what I would assume is her. Well, probably not disguise, but I figure in my mind this is like her. innocent disguise face.
I would say she believes she's Violet.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And Athena first meets Violet at this club, at this nightclub that is called Carmilla's. And Violet was a hat check girl. They were attracted to each other, and Violet sort of follows Carmilla home. And this is Violet outside of she follows Athena home. The two of them, sorry. The two of them end up getting together, but while they're getting together, Athena is obsessed again with finding out who's murdering these young women, and whenever she has any issues, any problems, anybody to talk to, she turns to her grandfather, her Yaya, because both her parents were killed, and Yaya raised her. And what I love about this book is that it takes place in New York City, and so much of the story takes place in Chinatown. That's where Yaya, her grandpa, lives, and that's where the Carmilla nightclub is. And Amy, do you want to tell us about this scene?
Yeah, so, and I think a lot of you probably have, if you go down to China, not even just Chinatown, but a lot of the parks, you see some of these elders, not even all elders, doing the Tai Chi, and that's her dad basically leading the group down in that park where I used to play street hockey back in the 90s, actually. But
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. With I did. Not Tai Chi. It's probably safer to do Tai Chi, to be honest. So that's the scene there to establish both Yaya and also that how Athena actually is quite good at it as well, because we need to have some ability. You all want to read some action, right? If she was really a real social worker, perhaps she's not going to have as many badass moves. I don't know. I could be wrong. But this was just to set that stage, but also ground it in Chinatown as a community, because a lot of Chinatown, the way Chinatown is portrayed is not as an actual community of folks, but kind of like either, certainly in the 80s, kind of an exotic place, or, right, there's a lot of stereotypes, but very often not about the history and community. So I want to make sure that comes out in this book very much. So that is part of why we set that scene, and that's really a lot of it, but also to establish her relationship with Yaya.
I mean, I grew up in like pockets of Asian neighborhoods my entire life, and it still happens in my parks. The old people still do Tai Chi, and from 6 a.m. to like 3 p.m. And so this is like very normal, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I know exactly what this looks like. I just pass by my local park and I see it too. So
I unlike Sue, I grew up in mostly non-Asian communities. I grew up in Iowa, so a lot of the stuff I actually had to learn when I was doing work in Chinatown. It's not what I grew up with, so it's what I really learned. And part of this too, we didn't really have a chance to do as much with this book, but the second book, trying to show that that we're not monolithic, which is what is important here.
Yes,
but this type of stuff is very familiar to a lot of other people. That's not me. My dad does Tai Chi, but it's it's not the same. Anyway.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, one of the many things that appealed to me about Amy's pitch when she said she wanted to reimagine this old Gothic vampire story in the modern day was the fact that she was telling it through the lens of the Asian American people, culture, community, and she, just really in a very lovely way layered both books with so much Asian, tradition and particular stories and ghosts and vampires and food and neighborhoods that relate to the Asian community. So I think that you really kind of feel that you're really, taken in to this world. So thank you for doing that. And here I was going to say Sue, Sue and Amy. Violet and Athena end up having a pretty passionate love affair. I picked kind of a tame image for this because I wasn't quite sure who's going to be in the audience. But they wind up having, quite the thing. Wouldn't you say, Sue?
Yeah, I think it's. I feel like the colors of the scene kind of translate like danger and also like the passion, as you said. But I don't know. When I drew it, I was hoping it makes you feel like a little uneasy, especially with the colors, because I wanted to be like,
absolutely.
She shouldn't be doing this,
I did write it, I didn't draw it, obviously, but I did write it in a way that I think not all of us, or most of us, some of us have had someone in their lives which there was a kind of a slippery slope, right? And I wanted to reflect that because too often when we're reading things, everything seems a little too perfect. And, a lot of this is about being a flawed human being, or maybe a flawed vampire, flawed human being in the way we make decisions. And I wanted to make sure that was really part of it, right? That we're not always thinking very lucidly about our choices, right?
And also, Athena is in a relationship with another woman. They've been living together for several years. I think she's her college sweetheart. So here she winds up having an affair with this, wild woman who's, also a junkie and mysterious and doesn't really know that much about her. So, and she obviously didn't plan to get into this kind of relationship, but she does succumb to Violet, who winds up being Carmilla. She ends up succumbing to her, seductive ways. Yeah. Amy, do you want to tell us about this other yeah page?
Oh, so let me think. This is when
they have brunch. I
yeah,
guess.
they're having dim sum on probably Doyer Street, right?
Yes,
It's like
yes,
I think they're
yeah.
having dim sum, and he basically is confessing that their family history, as with a lot of us, is they never tell us the truth, right? So this is when she's just doing a spit take because it's like really, Yea's just trying to explain certain things, and that's when she does not believe him and calls for the Maidan, the check, And again, I wanted to make sure if you go down to Chinatown that it's very authentic.
And this is when we find out that Athena. This is when Athena finds out that her parents were vampire hunters and that she's from a long line of vampire hunters through Chinese history who have
Chinese
killed...
vampires.
Chinese vampires, right, yeah. And that's when she's like, waiter, get, check, please. I don't believe any of this.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, good colors.
Oh, thank you.
This is
this is one of my favorite pages.
Yeah,
one of my
stuff,
favorite
right,
pages.
but most of you have already read the story, you figured it out, right? And a lot of this is really just the art of writing is about manipulation. You kind of already may know what's going on, but we need to suck you in and then deliver. If this doesn't work, then you're all very unhappy, and we get the bad reviews or whatever. But this is the stuff where you're starting to see the payoff of the basement of her mansion.
Right, of Carmilla's
So I
mansion,
always figured
yes.
Carmilla, she's been around for a long time. She's going to be rich. She's not going to be poor and homeless. She's going to be rich. And so she's got a really nice place in Greenwich Village, right? Because that's what you would do. You would buy real estate at the turn of the century, and it would pay off. So there's a method behind the madness. It's not just a basement and a tenement. It's literally, she's got a really nice, I scoped it out. There's a really nice mansion, right?
There are, yes.
And this is when Athena finds out that Violet is Carmilla, that Carmilla has murdered all these missing women, and this is when Violet comes out as Carmilla. And I just love the way that Soo drew this, especially that last panel where we're sort of transitioning into this sort of big money shot. Where's our big money shot?
Oh, no.
There it is. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Soo, tell us about this image.
I mean, the page was pretty much just like turn her into a big dragon, right?
Right.
And I was like, there's a million ways to draw just like a big dragon, but I felt like, I don't know, I could like use a splash page and draw a tiny dragon, like it's like a whole exposition. But then I figured if it's going to be massive, it should just kind of cram the entire page, so that you're kind of like a little confused at what you're looking at, and also like, oh, that's a dragon, right? It's like how's it fitting into this space, right? And it also feels a little like sudden when it's this like compact into the page, and then there's like no other information other than like focusing on this thing. I felt like would be the most powerful impact on how to show that, I guess. But yeah, and I figured like a dragon, I'm not going to do like a Western dragon. It has to be like an Asian, like a traditional Chinese dragon, right? Yeah, and I also used the traditional paintings as references when drawing the dragon. Like I wanted it to look like one of those paintings.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And this is the following scene where Yaya kind of just comes to the rescue, right, Amy?
Yeah, and again, a lot of this is when I'm writing is a reaction to a lot of things. I really hate when elders are victimized in a lot of ways, and I'm like, well, he's got to be badass. The guy does Tai Chi every day. Come on, right? Tai Chi is not just yoga. I mean, literally, it's a martial art, and so this is all prepping for we get to see Yaya do some badass things. That's just me.
And he slays the dragon.
He does things, right? I don't know. We need to reveal everything, but right, he does what he needs to do.
He does what he needs to do, and then Carmilla at the very end goes up in a flame of smoke, and we think that Carmilla is gone when we end the first book.
But we need a second book,
right?
But
we need a second book, right? So.
But Yaya also is like that scene.
Oops, sorry.
No.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, like it is very like, Asian grandparent, right? Like the very protective, very like proactive. And he's a little bossy in the way he saves, them as well, if you've read the book. So I feel like it kind of fits into that like trope very well. I mean, and it's like, Asian grandparents or parents are usually like very selfless in my experience. So they're very like, I know what's best for you. So even when he's saving her, he's like, I know what's best for you, which is endearing.
And he sacrifices himself. We'll get onto what he leaves her, what he leaves behind for her when we start talking about the second book. And here's a nice trailer that we did for the second book. Here we go. All right. So as you can tell from the beginning of the trailer, that the first book got a lot of critical acclaim, so well deserved by these two talented women. Made top 10 lists of multiple publications, and a big feather in our cap was winning the Bram Stoker Award for Best Superior Achievement in a Graphic Novel. So, we're very honored, very, very honored to have received that. And but even before we got all of the acclaim, we were already talking about doing a second book because I knew how good it was. We had really good initial orders, and when Amy first pitched the book to me, she told me so much more of what she wanted to explore, particularly about Chinese immigration and Chinese history in America. And that really appealed to me because in our history books, I didn't know anything about the Chinese Exclusion Act in, 1872? I think it was 1872 or 1874, sorry. I didn't know about riots that happened in LA where Chinese men were targeted and murdered. I didn't know that so many Chinese men came over from China to find work, to start new lives, to hopefully make enough money to bring their families over, and the violence that they met, and how many of these men worked as miners, worked on building railroads out west. And so Amy wanted to explore all of these issues and topics some more, so we thankfully went ahead and did the second book. So Amy, quickly tell us where we are.
Okay,
What
yeah.
city are we in now?
So we're going to go cross country to San Francisco. This is my way of indoctrinating everyone on Asian American history. You came for the monsters, and you get a little dose of history on the side. So it's a win-win for everyone, right? I thought it would be incomplete because New York City, Chinatown, if we're going to do this, and part of it is the discovery, and it somewhat mirrors my own family history, by the way, because almost everyone, actually, not everyone, but a lot of history is on the West Coast. It came over on the West Coast, including my own grandfather, by the way. My grandfather came over in the early, something like 1903. This is not about him, but about a whole group of folks very similar. And so some of this history is actually patterned slightly off of my own family history. But the idea being in the search for ourselves in our own history, which I think a lot of people sort of take on, depending on where you are in life, but in this case, she decides to get on a plane. Since it was just revealed, my family are not vampire hunters, but my grandfather was a sign painter, in fact, in Seattle. She goes on and all she has is one photo of her true family, and this is all, again, not to get super personal, right? But it turns out my father was adopted, and my grandfather, arguably, right? The term paper son, right? Because it was illegal to immigrate, a lot of people had to use other people's papers. And this is something that a lot of families don't talk about, even now. And so there's some murkiness, I think, for all of us in some of the situations like this. And in this case, she does have a photo. He leaves behind a journal and a photo of
Yeah, does.
Yeah.
After
I'm
Yaya
sorry.
dies,
Yeah.
And she's
So
cleaning
there's
up
all
the
this.
room.
We got to start the second book with some mysteries she needs to solve, and this is part of a family history, but also, right, we're going to embark on a whole thing. I don't want to reveal everything, but that's the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, after Yaya dies at the end of the first issue, he tells Athena, "Don't forget to water my plants when you go to my apartment." And she goes to water the plants, and she finds this diary or this book that had this picture of Athena as a very young girl. But those aren't her parents. She's with two other people, and she's like, well, who are these people? And why am I in San Francisco's Chinatown? And who's this little boy in the corner of the image?
And the diary is in Chinese, too, just in case you're wondering why,
yes.
there's a lot of things, I had to consult my mom on this, by the way.
Right.
Some of this.
And in the final art, actually, we do have Chinese characters in that third panel. This was, I think I took the wrong piece of art, whatever, when we put in this slideshow together.
It would have been hard
So,
for you, those of
yes.
you who can read Chinese. It would have been hard for you to read anyway. My mom authenticated it and said that this is old Chinese and it is hard to read.
So Athena is getting off the plane in San Francisco, looking to find her family, looking to find any clues to who her family might be. And she immediately, after checking into a hostel, she starts walking around Chinatown. It's late at night, and she gets stuck in the middle of a gang warfare. But the people who are fighting are not ordinary people, right, Sue?
No. You'll have to find out.
You'll have to find out.
There will be some slides.
Right, exactly.
It's not good for San Francisco tourism.
Exactly.
I actually just went.
Yeah.
I went a couple weeks ago, and I found the hostel that we patterned.
Oh, the Blue Turtle?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
patterned after the green. I forgot what it was
The
called.
green something.
Green tortoise or something. Anyway, I went there, and
yes,
it was
yes.
kind of it was a slightly sketchy area. The interior was completely different from what we thought it would be, but the exterior is the same.
I went to San Francisco before I knew this was set in San Francisco, actually, like 2020 like 2 years ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it.
Yeah, so it's just great.
I
city.
walked
Yeah.
everywhere. I
Yeah,
think it's called
yeah.
the 7x7, and it's like I literally walked blocks, and it was like I had the best time. The vibes are great. I was like, this is wonderful. This is like
San
a
Francisco's
tiny New
great
York.
city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved it. If everything
Yeah.
felt great.
In another life, I would have lived there. But yeah, Athena doesn't just randomly start, putting stakes through people's hearts. She finds out these are vampires who start attacking her. She quickly, summons up her, genetic vampire hunting abilities and starts killing these vampires. And
so some of the thinking, again, there's a method to the madness there. I find that a lot of vampire stories are very Eurocentric here, and I'm like, that's not consistent with American immigration. If I were a vampire immigrating, right, we should have the same demographics, right?
Exactly.
This is the way I figure it, right?
Yeah. And so who are these other vampires and these that we're meeting here, Amy?
I was trying to represent the whole of the AAPI diaspora.
it's like a whole
Because
amalgamation.
they're really scary. I'm sorry. I think they are scarier than a lot of
Some of them
European.
I think they are too.
Yeah.
Some of them
I
are
think
very
they too.
ridiculous.
Yes, they
yeah.
are.
The heads can detach and fly out at you, right? That's freaking, scary.
Right, but there's a Japanese vampire here. There's a Filipino vampire, right?
So they overlap too, because a lot of this mythology is, they're not just specific to one region. You'll find some variation of the scary head.
Yeah, I love that one.
There's a lot of that. And of course, a lot of it is sort of, if you read the lore, it's generally like a woman who's been wronged. I don't know what that says, but so I was trying to make it a little bit more updated, that you don't have to wrong the woman for us to be really scary and,
So what happens, very quickly is that Athena gets taken back to the headquarters of one of these vampire gangs, and a lot of the vampires that we just saw, are actually, I guess, working for this very ruthless leader who looks like a young boy. And it turns out, Sue, tell us who this young boy really is.
Her brother.
Her brother, exactly.
her long-lost brother.
Her long-lost brother.
Her older brother.
Her older brother, the boy from the photo, and who's pretty much insane, right? Will you say? At this stage.
Power hungry?
Well,
Power
no,
hungry,
it's a
insane.
psychopath.
Yeah,
Psychopath. Yeah,
right,
psychopath.
right,
I think it's.
yeah.
I mean, he has reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. He tells the story. There's a great scene in the book where he tells Athena, this is why you'll have to get the book after this, where he tells Athena about their real parents and how they emigrated from Hong Kong via, right?
It's a story
From
of
China.
immigration.
It's a story
It is a
of
story.
immigration.
You don't have to be a psychopathic zombie to be, Anyway, there is reflective of some real immigrant stories that went badly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And Athena was taken away as a young child by Yaya, who was a disciple of the parents of the vampire hunter parents. Correct.
He
Brother
saves
Go.
her.
Right. Yeah,
There's
he
two
saves
different
her.
paths here, but
Right.
you can see the brother here is.
And the brother is left behind. The brother is
yeah.
left behind, and he grows up to.
He does what he needs to do
Do,
to
right,
survive,
yeah.
and I think, and again, this is somewhat patterned after, in every community there's some elements of gangs, who do things that they need to survive, and he is particularly ruthless and becomes the head of this particular tong, which, supernatural, but yeah.
And he's been looking for Athena all his life, and he kind of heard about Carmilla being killed, and then he heard that Athena might have had something to do with it, and and he wants to turn her. He wants to turn her into a vampire because he's a vampire himself, and Athena is able to escape from his lair, and then she winds up in this idyllic place, at least on the left, idyllic place, and winds up meeting this woman who appears to be a Buddhist monk, and Sue, I don't know how much we want to reveal here, but she might have something to do with the original Carmilla, and she might be evil, right?
Well, I hope the page next to it kind of gives you a context clue of what's happening. It's a dream sequence, so I wanted it to be very weird, and I feel like that's what dreams are, right? Just like flash of images that you remember. You don't really remember, It's a dreamy sequence, sorry. So I wanted it to be like very abstract and strange, and I did this for the last volume, but the reason why it's so colorful is because it kind of shows you the range of emotions that she goes through. And so I did that for her. It wasn't a trailer, but there's a scene where she's like going through it in Athena's apartment.
Right.
And so I wanted to reflect that that's what's happening as well.
I mean, who's to say what's real and not, especially in these worlds? And if some of you might have been upset with some of the deaths that may have occurred in book 1, you'll see some of them in book 2. That's all I'm saying.
And that dragon looks familiar. So is Carmilla, has she re-emerged? Is this a dream? Who are those skeletons in the corner of this monastery? You'll have to read the second book to find out if Carmilla really had something to do with this, or it was totally in Athena's head. And now we are back on the streets of San Francisco, and we're back for kind of the big showdown with Athena and against her brother Wing. And I love the way that Sue drew this page and the next page. Oops, this page is sort of like a Kill Bill kind of slash and attack sequence.
Kinetic.
Yeah, kinetic, right? Kinetic.
We just got a very good review. That's
yes,
your lines were kinetic.
Thank you. I mean, also the colors reflect, I kind of wanted to reflect on his emotional range as well while this is happening. Because it's like, Wing is like trying to get the job done, but I wanted to show that he's also like, that I don't want to spoil it. Things happen. There's a reason why they're fighting, and he's not as stoic as we think he is. So I wanted the colors to reflect like his emotions and what he might be going through while doing it. Because it is a very like quick scene, but I figured colors is like a really good way to show that. So you're in the moment as well.
And this is one of my favorite pages of the book. And actually, in the actual book, we have a really nice development art section, and we show several pages of Sue's work, from layout stage to pencil to ink to color, and we chose this page in its different stages, which is really, really cool to see. And this character is Tak, who we haven't talked about, but he turns out to be a very important player in this book. And Amy, do you want to briefly tell us about who Tak is and what he kind of represents?
So Tak is a character that evolved considerably, because originally he was the right-hand the vampire, right-hand supernatural being of Wing, and he's been with him, loyal right-hand person, since the beginning, and
To Wing, yeah.
to Wing,
Right.
and starts having some doubts about Wing's sanity. What he's doing is correct, right? But loyalty sometimes overcomes that, right? And Tak, and this is where some of you might be writers or want to be writers. When you write, it's very easy to focus on like Athena and Wing and the relationship, but it's the side characters that can be very interesting that you want to flesh out. And Tak is one of the ones that got fleshed out so much.
As you were writing it, I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't even like in the original pitch.
It wasn't. In fact,
yeah.
I changed things at the very end that it tied in very nicely, because, as you were saying, the lynchings that occurred in L.A. Chinatown that most people have forgotten about. He was one of the
never knew
miners that
about.
was lynched. And so it became, right, because if you're still on this earth, it's because you have not had something settled, and it made sense that he would have been one of those. And you can see here where he resolves a lot of those things that happens. And I won't give it away because it was very complicated, that it actually finally came together in a way that worked. But he's also somewhat modeled after, I used to work in Hong Kong for a couple of years. Yeah, I grew up in Iowa, and I needed to go on this journey myself, so I worked in Hong Kong. I met the bodyguard of a billionaire, and he's somewhat modeled after that bodyguard, a Nepalese bodyguard, like super stoic and tall and scary looking. Not a zombie, but I would see him all the time in the offices, because they had the offices above me. But this Nepalese bodyguard really loved ice cream, and it just struck me that his purpose is to scare you off, but he really loves ice cream. So I'd see him eating ice cream, and that just kind of not just humanized everything, but kind of shattered that illusion, right, of that. So that sort of informed how I approached Tak. In you're not going to see him eating ice cream because he doesn't eat, but
If he could.
he could.
and this sort of winds up the second book. And, Tak, unfortunately, passes from the earth, but he's, yeah, right? We wrap it up, right? We wrap it up. And Athena winds up finding a new love in her life. And, this last page, it's not the last page, but it's one of the final pages of the book.
There's some redemption here, because we go
Right.
super dark in the first book. I kind of wanted to bring people back up a little bit. So, and again, because this was set in the 90s, where same-sex relationships were only just, right, that this is where I felt like we need to have that redemption, and we end in a way that people are happy about.
And,
She really messes things up in the first book,
she does, relationship-wise. She really does. She really does, yeah. But, I think as you can tell from, what we've been, talking about in these two books, that Carmilla is very much a vampire story, but it's so much more than a vampire story. It's a story about family. It's a story about identity. It's a story about
relationships.
Relationships, yeah, relationships, and for me as an editor, it's always important that a story, has multiple layers, and it's more than just the kind of a story, and that there's, what are we talking about thematically? In the book. And I think Amy and Soo, Amy through her writing and Soo through her art, really deliver in such a wonderful way, these characters and their journeys and the themes of family and togetherness and strife as well too. But there's a lot going on here, and I want to thank you all for watching our show and listening to us, and we'd love to take some questions. If there are any questions from anyone in the audience. Yes, actually, here comes
Have a
mic.
microphone. Hold on.
Oh, thank you. I actually had a question about the trailers. In the
Yes.
first trailer, it reminded me a lot of Indonesian gamelan music, especially the gongs, which are like the angklung in the gamelan. So I was just wondering what the source of that particular music for the trailer was.
I'm not sure exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In full disclosure, my son produced the trailer, the visuals, and my nephew is a composer. My nephew did the music.
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, so it's a real family affair.
But we can ask him.
But I can ask him
Right.
for
Okay,
sure.
great.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you
sure.
very much.
Yeah. He tried to be very authentic, so I'm sure that it's, taken from.
I had this old
books,
memory
yes,
from the
yes.
70s in which, and I'm such a nerd about this stuff, for a news thing based in Bali, they didn't play Balinese gamelan, they played Javanese gamelan, and I was like, so I get nerdy about
Yeah,
that
I will
stuff.
ask him. Yeah,
Thank you
I will
very
ask
much.
him. Yeah, thank you. Great question.
I think we have time for one more.
Just a quick question. First of all, thank you for this event. I enjoyed it very much. I am curious, is there a particular reason why you focus more on like a general like presentation of Asian culture, like versus like focusing on one specific culture, like for example, just Chinese vampires? Because I know you said in the second book, like there's a mix of different types.
That's a
of
good
different
question,
countries.
and that is my choice, largely because I did want to focus on immigration and not just make it a specific Chinese American story. I think it reflects more. There's she meets a new woman who's actually she's Chinese and Korean, but I think it's more reflective of our society and our immigration, and I think it helps with people resonating more with the message. Also, honestly, it's reflective of my social. I don't mix with a lot of vampires, but I mix with a lot of Pan-Asian identity, right? A lot of my friends are, across the Indonesian, Korean, Chinese. We're all like more and more hyphenated society. So it's not even just Jamaican Chinese, etc. So why restrict to one story when I can make it broader? And it's more interesting for Sue to draw. All of these.
Most everything I drew from like the Buddhist temples and stuff like that. Like I grew up going to temple in upstate New York with my grandma. I know what that looks like. I've been to the Buddhist temples in Queens. Like I know what that looks like. The decor in Volume 1 for Yeya's house, I know exactly what that looks like because Asian parents have like the same. There's like a set thing that they do in all the houses. But, it makes sense to me to draw this because this is kind of like my life. Like I'm not Chinese, but like, we share the same kind of traditions and cultures.
A lot of similarities. Yeah. Everyone shops at Costco.
Right. It's like, so everything I've already seen, I already know. This is my, not vampires, but this is my normal life. And so it's like, why not show that? Everyone else gets to show their normal lives for the most part. And I feel like Asian representation is kind of just like on the back burner a bit. You're either the side character or like the good friend, right? And so.
Wacky neighbor.
Right. Or the wacky neighbor, yeah.
Great, thank you.